The auctioneer called her up twice before she moved, not because she had not heard him. The whole yard had heard him. 20, maybe 30 people gathered in the flat October light outside the Bitterroot Valley trading post, breath clouding the cold air, hands in pockets, faces arranged into the careful blankness of people who have come to watch something they would prefer not to name directly. She had heard her name the first time. She had simply stood at the edge of the crowd for the length of a long breath, making a private accounting of what was about to happen. And then she had walked to the front of the wagon bed and stood there with her hands at her sides and her chin at the angle that was not defiance and not submission, but something in between that she had found, over 22 years, to be the only angle worth holding. Her stepfather leaned against the post office wall 30 feet away and did not look at her once. If you already know what it costs a woman to stand where no one should have to stand and hold her chin up anyway, subscribe to this channel right now and drop the name of your city in the comments below. I want to see how far this story travels tonight. Because what happens next in that yard is not the end of Nora Beale's story. It is, by every measure that matters, where her story finally begins. Her name was Nora Beale, or had been, before Harold Beale married her mother, and her mother died, and the name became something Harold used the way a man uses a fence post, to hold something in that he did not particularly want but could not afford to let wander. She was 22 years old. She was not a small woman and had never been one. Broad across the back and shoulder, solid in the way of women who have worked since they could stand, the kind of woman that the women of Bitterroot Valley looked at with a particular expression, assessing and then dismissing, the way you look at furniture that will do, but isn't what you'd have chosen. She had cooked Harold's meals and cleaned Harold's house and kept Harold's account books and tended the dry goods counter from the age of 14. And what Harold had given her in return was a roof, 2 dresses, and the persistent reminder that she had cost him more than she was worth. It was the account books that had been her undoing, or rather, it was what she had found in them. Harold owed a debt to a man named Cutter, a land creditor out of Missoula. $312 accumulated over 4 years of bad decisions that Harold had kept hidden in a second ledger behind the first. She had found it on a Tuesday and said nothing, because she had learned the hard way that saying things to Harold produced results she was not prepared to manage. But Harold had come in while she was closing the ledger and had seen her face. And Harold was many things, but he was not stupid about what people knew. The labor auction had been his idea. Indentured service, perfectly legal in the territory in 1881, a relic of an older system that the frontier had never entirely abandoned. 7 years of contracted labor, transferable to a creditor or sold outright to whoever would pay the most. He had posted the notice himself, in his own handwriting, on the trading post board, and he had described her as experienced in domestic work, accounts, and general farm labor. He had not used her name. He had described her age, her health, and her capacity for work in the language of a man pricing livestock. And he had set the opening bid at $5, which told everyone who came what he thought she was worth. There were 4 bidders. 3 of them dropped out inside the first minute. The opening $5 sat in the air like something everyone in that yard was trying not to look at directly. The man at the back of the crowd did not raise his hand. He raised 2 fingers, barely, the way a man signals a bartender when he is not entirely sure he is thirsty. The auctioneer took it. No one else bid. She did not know who had bought her until she stepped down from the wagon bed and turned around and found him standing apart from the rest, a little to the left, as though he had not quite committed to being part of the crowd and was keeping his options open. He was large, genuinely large. Not the merely tall of men who had grown fast and kept going, but the deep-chested, wide-shouldered large of a man built for country that pushed back. Dark beard, dark coat, a hat that had been good once and was now simply functional. He looked at her the way she had found very few people looked at her, directly, without the measuring quality, without the dismissal waiting at the end of it. Just looking, trying to understand something. "I'm Cole Maddox," he said. "I have a homestead. 11 miles north, up Bitterroot Ridge." "I know where the ridge is," she said. "I need somebody who can keep a house and manage stores," he said. "That's what was advertised. That's what I do," she said. He nodded once. He did not say anything about the $5. She did not thank him for it. A debt was a debt, and gratitude was not owed for the creation of one. She picked up her bundle, everything she owned in the world in a canvas sack the size of a man's traveling bag, and followed him to the wagon. Harold Beale watched her go from across the yard and said nothing. She did not look at him. She had looked at him for the last time she intended to. The wagon driver was Cole himself, which meant there was no intermediary for the 11 miles of road, just the two of them, and the horse and the cold. He did not fill the silence with talk. She respected that. What she learned in those 11 miles she learned from what she could see, the way he handled the reins, unhurried and competent. The way his eyes moved across the tree line at intervals, the way a man's eyes move when he is accustomed to watching for something. He had a rifle on the seat between them and a long knife on his belt, and the relaxed posture of a man who had been alone long enough that another person's presence beside him did not require management. She had been right about the 11 miles. She had been miscounting how long she had needed to find something like quiet. The homestead on Bitterroot Ridge was 2 buildings. The main cabin and a smaller structure that had been a smokehouse and was now something between a smokehouse and a storage room, to judge by the evidence. The cabin was solid. A man had built it with care and without haste, the logs fitted close and the chinking fresh. The roof steep enough to shed the heavy mountain snow she could already smell coming on the wind. The yard was clean. The woodpile was stacked with the precision of someone who understood that disorder in small things became disorder in large things when the temperature dropped to 20 below. She noted all of this without comment. The inside of the cabin was a different matter. Not filthy. He was not a filthy man. That was plain enough. But starved of the particular attentions that a house requires beyond mere cleanliness. The cook stove had not been properly blacked since summer. The flour was kept in a sack on a high shelf, which was sensible for keeping rodents out, but made daily use inconvenient, and had resulted in a coating of dried flour on every surface within 2 feet of the shelf edge. The single window faced east and had not been washed since the last rain had washed it from outside, which gave the morning light a gray, reluctant quality. There was a table, 2 chairs, a shelf of books, more books than she had expected, 24 at least, and in the corner a cot with a blanket folded on it that he gestured toward without ceremony. "That's for you," he said. "I sleep in the loft." She set her bundle on the cot. "Supplies," she said. He showed her what he had. It was enough. Not generous, but enough. The stores of a man who knew what he needed and kept to it. Cornmeal, dried beans, salt pork, a crock of lard, dried apples in a covered tin, coffee, a root cellar she had not seen from outside, accessed through a hatch in the floor, that held potatoes, turnips, and 3 jars of something put up in summer that turned out to be chokecherry preserves. She looked at the preserves for a moment. A man who put up chokecherry preserves was not, whatever else he was, a man entirely without hope. "I'll have supper on by dark," she said. He went back outside. She rolled up her sleeves and began. He came in at dark, and she had cornmeal porridge with salt pork cut fine through it, and the chokecherry preserves opened and set on the table, because there was no reason to keep them sealed if there was someone to eat them. He sat down and looked at the table, and then at her, and said nothing. But he ate with the careful attention of a man who has been eating without tasting for some time and has rediscovered that taste is a thing that exists. When he finished, he sat for a moment. Then he said, "Where'd you learn to cook like that?" "Harold's house," she said, "feeding 4 farmhands 3 times a day since I was 14. She began clearing the plates. A person learns or the hands complain. He was quiet again. Then he had no right to do what he did today. "No," she said. "He didn't. Why didn't you leave before it came to that?" She turned from the basin and looked at him directly. "Where would I have gone?" she said. Not bitterly, it was simply the question. The one she had asked herself approximately 400 times in the last 3 years, the one that had no satisfying answer. A woman alone in this territory without money or land or family is not a woman who has choices. She is a woman who waits for one to come to her. He looked at her for a long moment. "And now you have one," he said. "I have a 7-year contract," she said. "That's not the same thing." "No," he said. He stood up from the table and took his hat from the hook by the door. "But it's a start." He went out to do the last of the evening chores. She washed the dishes in the basin and listened to the wind find the gaps in the territory outside, and did not allow herself to think further ahead than morning, because she had learned that further ahead than morning was a direction that had never served her well. The days took on their shape. She rose before light and had the stove going and coffee on before he came down from the loft, and he drank his coffee without demanding conversation, which she found to be one of the more valuable qualities a person could possess. She cleaned the cabin, she managed the stores with the precision she had applied to Harold's ledgers, and she cooked. Properly cooked. The way she cooked when she was not simply feeding men who needed fuel, but actually thinking about what could come out of what was available. She made a pot of bean soup that had dried sage and wild onion in it that she had found growing along the creek bed, and he ate 2 bowls and said she did not need to trouble herself, and then moved his bowl closer to the pot. She made cornbread in the skillet with a thin crust that shattered at the first press of a fork, and he broke off a piece before it had fully cooled, and then ate 3 more pieces after, and she observed this all from the other end of the table, without remarking on it. On the 5th day she found the ledger. She had not been looking for it. She had been reorganizing the shelf of books, which was the project of a morning, not because they were disorganized, but because she needed to know what was there. And the ledger was between a surveying almanac and a copy of Thoreau that had been read enough times its spine had given up. It was not hidden. He was not a man who hid things. It was simply a ledger. And she opened it because she kept ledgers, and it was instinct. And what she found inside was not accounts. It was a record of the homestead, not financial, or not only financial, but a log of everything he had done on the land since he arrived. Every fence post, every cord of wood, every repair and planting and first frost date and last frost date, sketched maps of the property in pencil with the creek and the timber line and the good grass marked, notes on the soil quality in different sections, the number of deer he had seen in the North Meadow each week for 2 years. It was the record of a man building something alone on a mountain and keeping faith with it by writing it all down. In the margin of an entry from the previous January, in handwriting that had been pressed harder than the rest, the handwriting of cold, or late hours, or some combination, were 4 words. "Cannot keep doing this." She closed the ledger and put it back between the almanac and the Thoreau, exactly where she had found it. That evening she asked him how long he had been on the ridge. 3 years, he said. Alone the whole time? He looked at the fire. My brother was here the first winter. He went back to Missouri in the spring. A pause. He said the mountain was killing me, and I was letting it. Was he right? Cole turned his coffee cup once on the table, the way a man turns a question over before deciding what it deserves. "There's a difference," he said finally, "between a man being killed by something and a man not being sure he wants to stop it." She said nothing. She sat with what he had said and let it take up the space it had earned. Outside, the wind pressed against the cabin walls with the purposeful weight of early winter coming down from the upper peaks, and the fire held its own against it, and the silence between them was not empty. It was the silence of two people in a room who have both been through something and are deciding, without negotiating it aloud, how close to let the other one stand. The trouble came down from the mountain on a Thursday in November, in the form of a man named Aldous Cutter. He was the same Cutter that Harold Beale owed $312. She knew the name from the ledger she had found, and, more specifically, from the document that arrived by courier 2 days before Cutter himself appeared. The document was addressed to Cole Maddox and informed him that the labor contract he had purchased at auction in Bitterroot Valley had been invalidated. The grounds, as stated by the solicitor who had written the letter in language chosen for maximum damage in minimum words, were these: the contracted party was not Harold Beale's to indenture. Nora Beale was, in fact, the daughter of the late Margaret Beale, born of Margaret's first marriage to a man named Calhoun, who had died in 1864. And as such she was the sole heir of a parcel of 40 acres on the South Fork of the Bitterroot River that Harold Beale had been quietly incorporating into his own property claim for 11 years. The labor contract was Harold's attempt to remove her from the territory before she could establish her legal claim. Cutter had purchased the debt from Harold the previous spring, and now held the land claim himself. And if the contract was voided, which it now was, Nora had no legal presence in Cole Maddox's household and could be removed from the territory as an unattached woman of no fixed address. She read the letter standing at the table, twice, and then sat down, which was not something she did in the middle of the day. Cole read it after her. When he finished, he set it on the table and looked at it for a long moment, the way he looked at things that required his full consideration. Then he said, "Your mother had land." "I didn't know," Nora said. Harold never said a word about her first husband. 40 acres on the South Fork. He folded the letter. "That's good land, good water. Cutter has it now, legally, or near enough. Near enough isn't the same as legally." He stood up. "I need to ride to Missoula." "Cutter will be here before you get back," she said. "The courier said 3 days. That was 2 days ago. Then I'll be back before he is." He was already moving toward the door, toward the hook where his coat hung. "I know a land attorney in Missoula, a man named Pruitt, who has dealt with fraudulent incorporation claims before and won 2 of them." He looked back at her. "Don't let anyone into this cabin while I'm gone." "I'm not afraid of Cutter," she said. "I didn't say you were," he said. "I said don't let him in." He was back in 36 hours. She knew it was 36 because she counted them, not from fear, she told herself, though she sat with the rifle across her knees the second night and watched the door with the attentiveness of a woman who has learned that she is her own best protection and has made her peace with that. He came back with 2 things. A letter from Pruitt that laid out the grounds for contesting the incorporation, and a document he asked her to read before he said what it was. She read it. It was a legal affidavit. It stated that Nora Beale, formerly of Bitterroot Valley, was residing in the household of Cole Maddox of Bitterroot Ridge as his intended wife, and that the labor contract was superseded by the intention of legal marriage, and that, as his intended, she had full claim to legal residency and protection under his property rights. She looked up from the paper. "This is a legal instrument," she said. "Yes," he said. He was watching her face the way he had watched her face on the day of the auction, that same direct attention. "It's not an obligation. You don't have to." Cole, I mean it. Pruitt said there's another argument we can make through the probate court, but it's slower, and Cutter will have had the land worked into his title by the time, Cole, she said again. He stopped. In 36 hours, she said. You rode to Missoula and back in November in the mountains to bring me a way out. She set the paper on the table. I'm not refusing it. Something in his face shifted the way something shifts in the face of a man who has been braced for a blow that did not come. All right, he said. But I want you to know, she said, that I'm not doing it because I have to. I'm doing it because I've been in this cabin for 5 weeks, and you have not once said a word to me about what I look like, or what I'm worth, or what you paid for me. She looked at him steadily. And that is the rarest thing I have encountered in 22 years. I would like to stay, not because I have to, because I want to. He looked at her for a long moment. Then he said, You changed everything in this cabin inside of a week. I want you to know that too. Cutter arrived the following morning. He was a well-dressed man, which was its own kind of insult in the mountains, the wool coat, the town boots, the solicitor behind him with a leather case who looked at the snow on the ground as though it had done something wrong. There were 3 other men from Bitterroot Valley, which meant Cutter had expected this to be the kind of situation that required witnesses to an unpleasantness. What he found when the cabin door opened was Cole Maddox, and beside him Nora, and on the table between them the signed affidavit in Pruitt's letter and a third document that had arrived by courier that same morning from the Missoula probate court, acknowledging receipt of the contested incorporation claim on the South Fork parcel and placing a temporary stay on any transfer of title pending review. Cutter read all 3 documents. The solicitor read them after him. Nora stood at the table in her apron with her hands still and her chin at the angle she had found and kept for 22 years. She watched Cutter's face go through its calculations. She had seen men do this accounting before. The moment when they understood that what they had come for was not available in the form they had expected, and they had to decide whether to change tactics or retreat. Cutter was not a foolish man. He could see what was in the room as clearly as she could. Cole said, She is my intended and a legal resident of this property. Pruitt will have the probate matter resolved by spring, at which point the land reverts to its rightful heir. His voice was level, not loud. He did not need loud. You came out here for something that's no longer here to take. I'd suggest you use your return journey productively. Cutter looked at Nora one more time. Then he looked at Cole. Then he picked up his copy of the documents, folded them, handed them to the solicitor, and left. The 3 men from Bitterroot Valley left with him. One of them, a man she recognized from the trading post, a man who had stood in the yard the day of the auction and watched without bidding, looked back once before he climbed onto the wagon. She did not look away. He looked away first. The yard went quiet. Cole closed the door. She turned back to the stove because the bread was going to burn if she left it another minute, and she took the loaves out and set them on the board and stood with her back to him for a moment, breathing the smell of fresh bread and wood smoke and the particular clarity of a morning in which something that had been threatening has been resolved, not because someone else had solved it for her. She had read the documents. She had understood the probate law. She had helped Cole write the letter to Pruitt that made the argument. She had held this cabin alone for 36 hours with a rifle across her knees and had not opened the door to anyone. She had done that. She turned around. Cole was still at the door, looking at her. Thank you, she said. Don't, he said. You did most of it. You rode to Missoula in November. You changed everything in this house in a week, he said. We can keep score, or we can eat breakfast. She looked at him. The dry, flat edge in his voice when he said the last sentence was the closest thing to humor she had heard from him in 5 weeks, and it landed in her chest like the first warm day after a long winter, small and certain, and completely unexpected. She cut the bread. They were married in the Bitterroot Valley Church on a Saturday in February, which was the earliest the ground was passable, and the settlement of the probate matter came through in March, giving her clean title to the 40 acres on the South Fork, which she and Cole, combined with his ridge, claimed to make something larger and more coherent than either piece had been on its own. Harold Beale left the territory before the spring thaw. She did not know where he went, and did not pursue the question. What she knew was this. She knew the weight of a ledger in her hands and the meaning of a margin note written in the dark, in pressed handwriting. She knew the smell of a bread loaf pulled from the oven at the right moment, and the sound of a man who has stopped being alone, eating it without speaking, because speaking would take time away from eating. She knew the way a mountain looked in October, cold and certain and indifferent to the concerns of the people at its feet. And she knew that indifference was not hostility, only distance, and that distance could be crossed by a woman who did not stop walking. In the spring, when the South Fork land was hers in full and the first survey stakes were in the ground, Cole drove them out in the wagon to look at it. 40 acres of good grass and good water. The creek running high with snowmelt. The cottonwoods coming out along the bank in the particular hesitant green of a Montana April. He stood at the edge of it and looked at it for a long time. "Your mother's land," he said. "My land," she said, not correcting him, completing it. He looked at her. The expression on his face was the one she had been learning for 7 months. The one that was not a full smile, but was the country a smile came from. The one that lived in the way the lines around his eyes moved when he was looking at something he had decided he was glad of. She had been called worthless for 22 years by a man who needed her to be worthless so she would not know her own worth. She had been bought for $5 by a man who did not know her price was incalculable, and who had spent 7 months discovering it the same way she had, slowly, honestly, in the plain evidence of daily work and daily presence, in bread and ledgers, and the smell of wood smoke and a rifle held steady through a long, cold night. She was not worthless. She had never been worthless. She was the woman who changed his entire life. And she had done it simply by being, at last, exactly and completely herself.